Everyone says that Florida's governor is already decided. They're wrong, and the numbers show it. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Michael Bradford. If you're first time joining us, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. And what you think about the podcast. We want your opinion. So, who is running for governor? That's the big question leading up to this November. So, obviously, Byron Donalds was endorsed by Donald Trump, and the numbers show that about 40% back him. Now, where the media definitely gets it wrong is that almost no one my age, 30 and younger, really know or really like Byron Donalds at all, right? And that's where Trump succeeded the most. In fact, Byron Donalds' his biggest demographic is the older boomer age, 60 plus. And that is because they follow Trump. They watch the standard media, Fox News, CNN, whoever. They're not really going outside of the box. Whereas this new generation, millennials and younger, Gen Z, and I think Gen Alpha is still pretty young and too young to do this, to vote, to really pay attention to this. But no one my age is talking about Byron Donalds, unless you're a big media guy that's already trying to have his leg up, like Red Eagle Politics. You don't really have a huge push for Donalds. Why? Because Donalds doesn't have anything that he's pushing. The only thing that Byron Donalds has is that he's a sitting representative and that he's endorsed by Trump. That's his biggest proposals. His next biggest proposal is getting rid of property tax, but by the time November rolls around, that's going to be a moot point. Whether the voters accept it or not, it's going to be voted on in November. At least if the Senate passes it. So there's no point in that being the primary thing that Donalds is running on. So what is he running on? More of the same of DeSantis? That's the other thing. But in doing so, what does that entail? I mean, DeSantis is already kind of looking to run for president, so he's being more bodacious and kind of trying to get viral moments and stay relative because he's going to be out this year, and therefore needs to span 2 years before he can get to the presidential election. So, who else is there? All right. So you got several dark horse candidates, which I like. I personally am fond of James Fishback. Now, before everyone goes off on what he says. James Fishback is one of those guys that, at least for at the beginning of his campaign, said something I really liked. He basically wants to stop he identifies what the younger generation. He wants to stop the inflow of population growth to Florida. What good is it if all these jobs are created in Florida, but they go to out of state workers or out of country workers even with the H-1B visas? That doesn't make any sense. So that is one of my reasons for really pushing or really supporting James Fishback. Now, his biggest problem, in complete honesty, is he tries to say too much. Why? Because James Fishback is really not trying to win this governor's race because he's saying too much, right? Donalds is playing the classic political science. Don't say anything. You can't attack me if I don't say anything specific. Whereas Fishback is actually doing the exact opposite. Fishback is being basically taking a Trump-esque 2016 Trump specifically, trying to take his role of being bombastic, being very clickbaity. So he's going to he says things in a very controversial way on purpose. And he does this to get on the internet. People share, people like, and so that kind of gets him the name recognition that Byron Donalds or Jay Collins has. So that is one of the reasons why he's trying to do what he's doing there. So far we have Byron Donalds. More people don't want him as of right now than actually support him still. And honestly, you can attribute that to Trump and his endorsement. Now, one more thing about Donalds real quick before I go on to the other candidates, specifically Jay Collins, is that there's not really. I don't like somebody like Donald Trump telling me who to vote for immediately, right? Let the candidates develop. Let them put forth their policy measures, their one or two big pieces that they want to push, and then endorse and then hop on the train. But Byron Donalds is being too abstract. There's no. If I asked the random person, tell me why you would vote for Byron Donalds without mentioning Trump, it would have to be political platitudes, right? It would have to be, well, he has experience in Congress, or he would have experience dealing with politicians. There wouldn't be, or maybe something that he sponsored or co-sponsored in the House. But could you tell me the exact reason? Why is he running for the Florida governor? You can't really say. He's being purposefully, but he's being abstract. He's being the political platitude ad nauseum, right? So you'll talk about freedom, and you'll talk about jobs, and you'll talk about the economy, making Florida great, because that's the classic Trump line now. But you'll never have a specific policy, because he's trying to not say anything wrong. Because it is honestly right now his race to lose. And so if he says anything specific, this is a very common thing that politicians do, right? You'll very rarely hear them say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. James Fishback does that, which to his own demise, his own fault to a point, because then you can go, oh, well, I can attack him there, because that's an absurd policy, or that won't work. Therefore, you can discount his entire platform because he was wrong on one policy. Whereas the political science kind of thought is you be purposefully abstract until you have to be, right? As long as you have the lead, you don't say anything. You try to let your opponents make mistakes, because it's yours to lose, right? So if you don't say anything, if you just keep a little bit of the momentum, you can carry it through, and that's what Byron Donalds is really hoping to do. So now, why does Byron Donalds not matter this early? You got 4 months, right? You got a big debate coming up here in July. Why doesn't he matter being this far ahead? Well, because it's his to lose. He can say something. There's a policy that can come out, or he can just fall flat in the debate, and it's his to lose. So, excuse me. So this race can really shift fast if another candidate gets into the spotlight. That's what James Fishback is doing. So let me focus on him, and then we'll get to Jay Collins. Okay. So why? So he's again trying to stay in the spotlight. James Fishback, trying to stay in the spotlight, trying to say provocative things. The H-1B, improve Floridians' lives, not people to move here to make Florida great, but make people who already live here in Florida better, right? So it's like the American First kind of thought, right? Instead of trying to make the other side of the world better first, why not make here better first? Why is Israel even talked about in American politics, specifically at the state level? There's no point for it. I don't care if it's England. I don't care if it's India. I don't care if it's Australia. But for some reason, everybody is concerned about whether Israel is mentioned in a candidate. And AIPAC supports Byron Donalds. Why? What is a governor going to do for the state of the country of Israel? There's no point in it. So that's one of James Fishback's very prominent things that he's been going after is AIPAC. He's being very provocative with his statements. Again, gets him a lot of views, right? Because he doesn't have name recognition, he needs to be in the spotlight. There's no such thing as bad publicity. There's only publicity when you're that unknown. Now, people will write you off, but that's also because there's so many other establishment. They're probably more establishment anyways. The establishment is that for a reason, right? It's because they watch the Fox News channel. It's because they watch mainstream. They fall for the cookies and the algorithms on Facebook and X, right? So they think they get in their little bubble and they become culturally trapped, and becomes a positive feedback loop. And so what Fishback is trying to do is trying to reach younger voters. He may not win, but he'll make an impact for the future. There's a recent poll, I don't have the exact numbers, but it was something like 70 to 80% of sub 30-year-old voters prefer Fishback over the other four candidates. Now, does that get him a lot in the mainstream? Doesn't look like it, not yet at least. However, in the future, it will be a narrative shift, right? That's what Fishback is going for. Now, let's talk about some of the other candidates. All right, Jay Collins. Jay Collins is the current VP of Florida. Lieutenant governor, excuse me, of Florida, and his big policy is kind of being attached to DeSantis, right? DeSantis is, for better or for worse, a very popular candidate, or a very popular governor. Not in the Jeb Bush or the Rick Scott way, where they barely squeak by, but he has consistently, because of the way he handled COVID, become a very popular candidate. He performed very well on not backing down to Disney. Now, a lot of that does have to do with the amount of people that move to Florida, right? Is New York getting bluer or redder? Bluer. That's because the people who vote red, even if they're New York red or New York or California red, they're moving to Florida and still vote red. So it made him a very popular candidate and gave him a very large mandate for pushing through policies, with the biggest being this last one that's coming up here in November with property taxes. So, which would take a huge amount of political capital to push through. This is his big thing, and that will probably be his selling point on becoming president. So Jay Collins is very much attached to that. He's being vague too, very, very vague, but Jay Collins doesn't have as much of name recognition because he was appointed, right? So the lieutenant governor went somewhere else. I forget where he moved to exactly, but Jay Collins was appointed lieutenant governor, and so has very little name recognition when it comes to other candidates, particularly Byron Donalds, because Jay Collins is not attached to Trump. Jay Collins is trying to attach himself to DeSantis. Now, DeSantis has very wisely, I think, stayed out of making a decision on who to endorse in this race, because in doing so, he doesn't make enemies on one side of the aisle or the other. The aisle being Republican, the Republican coalition, so to speak. So Jay Collins is running pretty much as a tough guy candidate. He's trying to use his Green Beret status, his veteran kind of aura, and trying to bring that kind of thought process where you see him, he's always trying to look big and wearing suits that are slightly too small for him in order to kind of look like he's being the tough on crime, probably. I think that's where he's going to eventually position himself, is anti-crime. So he's also taken a few other places where on signing legislation in where Casey DeSantis was positioning herself, but it doesn't look like she's going to run. Jay Collins is kind of filling that void without the explicit approval of DeSantis. So he's the establishment alternative, if you want to think of it that way, where he's kind of thinking about looking mainstream, but anti-Trump. So probably towards the more neocon-esque part of the party that doesn't like Trump, although Trump is honestly the neocon darling right now because of Iran. So where is he right now? Well, he's very low, single digits. There's not, like I said, a lot of name recognition, and he hasn't said anything that really gets him out there, right? Of course, 4 months, a long ways away. And frankly, it's a crowded spot, a crowded race, but there's nothing to really position himself over, right? So, the race is still forming, and there's 40, 50, 60% of people undecided. And the only people, to be honest, that I know that are actively talking about the governor's race are the young people, right? Everything that comes, of course, my feed is algorithmed to me. So whether it's because of his popularity or not, I know of two other people that are the only two other people, really, that are in my personal circle talking about the Florida governor race. Found Fishback without me, right? They found because of because of the provocative things he says, but primarily because he's the candidate Trump as opposed to President Trump. So the American first kind of, the make America great again, but put America first kind of thought process. So if you're not purely run by Trump, you may want to consider Jay Collins. However, there's not a lot right now to set him apart. So, like I said, there's not a very clear policy platform. There's the generic platitudes. If you ever feel like really trying to compare candidates, go on their website and take Jay Collins and take Byron Donalds, and they're probably very much overlapped, right? You'll see vague terms like the economy and making Florida great again, probably. And so there's very little to set him apart. Now, there's another guy that has entered the race, Renner, and he's again, very not known candidate. So Byron Donalds, name recognition, right? That's his thing. All the other people in this race aren't being endorsed by Trump, aren't being endorsed by really great names right now because nobody wants to fight Trump. And so he's the former Speaker of the House. Who knows in Florida? Who knows the current Speaker of the House? I believe it's Perez, but that's only because I tried to pay attention, right? But if you talk to anybody who's the current Speaker of the House, that doesn't really carry a lot of weight as much as it shows party loyalty because of the factionalism and the way the Florida politics currently works right now. It's very much a good old boys network, kind of fractionalized within the Republican Party because it's so the Republicans have such a large majority. They have a supermajority, and it honestly wouldn't matter who became governor. It depends on how much political capital is behind it. So again, he's kind of trying to position himself as the DeSantis candidate. So everyone knows where Trump is. So Renner is trying to become the DeSantis candidate, just like Jay Collins is. Fishback. So you have Fishback over here, you have Donalds over here, and then you have Renner and Jay Collins, really splitting each other's votes, and probably actually polling what would be most of the Byron Donalds votes away from him. So honestly, those are the three kinds of groups you have. You have Jay Collins and Renner. You have James Fishback, and you have Byron Donalds over here. So the biggest policies for me, if you've watched this podcast for any time, obviously making Florida affordable. that's probably the biggest one. Not overbuilding Florida, not filling in swamps, keeping Florida, and not making it Florida, New York 2.0, right? Not having retirees be the decision makers in Florida, right? Because with that, all you get is service jobs. You get low-paying jobs, and you get. I'll digress on that one because I've already talked about that a whole lot. If you want to know more about that, go back into October. There's many times I've talked about this, but I don't want to talk about it today. I want to keep this on the main candidate. So you got those three. Now on the Democrat side, you're facing an uphill battle because no Democrat has won in Florida since 1994. Okay, so you have a former Republican. I forget his name off the top of my head. Let me pull up my notes real quick. Excuse me. David Jolly, that was his name. Excuse me. So David Jolly is a former Republican turned Democrat, kind of like a Chris Christie, where he runs as one thing and then figures out that he can't win in the primary, so he tries to win as a Democrat. His big push is healthcare, and Jerry Demings, very much kind of the Orange County darling. Him and his wife have both been very intertwined here in Orlando on different policies. He's the former mayor of Orange County, and so that's where his kind of pedigree comes from. And he's also the former mayor and former sheriff, and so they've kind of run in several different places. Him and his wife, and several different places in Orange County, Orlando, and so their idea is trying to position themselves as moderate. Right? You have to be as liberal enough to be the Democrat nominee, but you have to be moderate enough, so to speak, and being the kind of tolerable to the moderates and to the Republicans who don't like Byron Donalds. And Byron Donalds is attached to Trump. So the biggest problem Byron Donalds has is not anything to do with Florida. It has everything to do with how popular Trump is. So is Trump popular for doing Iran? No. Is Trump being popular for the Epstein files? No. Is he holding the feet to the fire on deportations? No. He's actually backed up on H-1Bs. So there's a lot of things that a candidate that's willing to, like James Fishback, to attack because you can attack Trump. The problem is that Trump is still extremely popular here in Florida, so you don't want to attach that necessarily you don't want to make your whole thing as anti-Trump if you're a Republican. If you're a Democrat, that's probably your main course of attack against a candidate like Byron Donalds. So, all in all, the race is still open. It's time to pay attention. Time to hold candidates to actual policies. If we don't do it, no one is. So, if you like this, I thank you for joining me for this episode. If you want to support, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Like and comment. That will help prolong this conversation. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have a good one.